She had knelt outside the gates of Blood Moon Crown for 3 days. No food from her own hand, no shelter but her own shawl, only a fevered child pressed against her chest, and a petition she refused to stop repeating. On the 3rd day, the guards let her in. Not out of mercy, only because the boy in her arms had stopped crying, and silence from a dying child frightened them more than her tears ever had. The great hall of Blood Moon Crown was built to remind the poor of their place. Marble floors that swallowed the sound of bare feet. Banners so high they seemed to belong to the sky, not to the men beneath them. And at the center of it all, a throne carved from black wood veined with silver, where Alpha King Kael'draven sat like a man who had already heard every complaint the world could offer. Mara Vale walked the length of that hall on her knees. She could have stood. No one had ordered her to crawl. But her legs had carried her nowhere for 3 days except toward this floor, and she no longer trusted them to hold her upright in front of a king. Her son, Noah, was almost 2.5, old enough to grip the wooden ring that hung from a cord around his mother's neck, old enough to understand, in the small, clear way that children understand fear, that his mother was afraid. He was burning with a fever no physician in the border village had been able to name. Mara stopped at the base of the throne. She lifted her face. "Please investigate my husband's death," she said. "He was not a deserter. He was killed because of something he knew at the border." The words landed in a room full of silk and gold like a stone dropped into a still pond, and the nobles laughed. Not all of them, but enough. A woman with a fevered child and no papers, claiming her dead husband had died for a secret, was the kind of story courts loved to laugh at, because laughing at it cost them nothing. Lady Seraphine did not laugh. She did something crueler. She lifted a single sheet of parchment stamped and sealed, and read from it in a voice that made mockery sound like mercy. "There is no registry of a Kieran Vale in this kingdom's service," she said. "This woman is an unverified claimant. Her petition is denied under the Widow Relief Fund's standing policy." Seraphine did not laugh like the nobles. She turned cruelty into paperwork, and paperwork, unlike laughter, could not be argued with in a room built to worship it. Mara did not move. "My husband existed," she said. "I do not need your registry to know that." King Kael watched her from the throne. He did not see a liar. He saw a woman clinging to a story, because the truth had abandoned her, and a court turning her grief into a performance for its own entertainment. He believed, in that moment, that he was protecting her from further shame. He did not ask a single question. He did not listen past the surface of what he saw. "Remove her," Kael said, "before this court turns grief into spectacle." Guard Captain Orlan stepped forward. He had followed harder orders than this one without a second thought. He reached for the child first, meaning only to separate them gently, to end the scene the king had asked him to end. The moment his hand touched Noah's shoulder, the boy flinched. He had felt his mother being pulled away from him before. He did not intend to feel it again. The fever that had burned quietly in his small body for 3 days answered his fear the only way it knew how. Silver light broke across his skin. Bones reshaped themselves in a heartbeat. Where a sick toddler had been kneeling in his mother's arms, a wolf cub now stood. Black fur, threaded through with a shimmer of silver, and across his brow, unmistakable even to those who had never studied bloodlines, a crescent mark that belonged only to the direct line of the Alpha throne. The hall went silent in a way marble and gold had never managed to force on their own. Inside Kael's chest, his wolf spirit Riven rose without being called. The cub remembers what the king was made to forget. Riven's voice rolled through him like a second heartbeat, older than words, and Kael felt it land somewhere he could not name. Lord Varric was already moving. "That mark," he said, "confirms a direct heir. He must be taken into royal custody at once, for his own protection and the crown's verification." Lady Seraphine, recovering faster than most, offered her own version of concern. "A protected nursery," she said, "with royal physicians, away from uncertainty." Mara pulled Noah against her chest before either of them could take a single step closer. "Don't touch my son like he's evidence," she said. He is sick. It was the court's healer, Mara, who finally silenced the room. She had not laughed. She had not schemed. She had only watched a fevered child shift for the first time in front of 40 strangers who wanted to argue about his bloodline before anyone asked if he could breathe. He is not evidence yet, Mara said. He is a child in fever. Kale raised a hand, and the court, trained to obey that gesture instantly, fell still. He looked at the wolf cub trembling against his mother's chest, and for the first time since she had entered the hall, he actually looked at Mara Vale, not as a disruption to be removed. As a woman who had just watched her son transform in front of the very men who moments ago had called her a liar, Mara knelt beside them. She examined Noah without touching him more than necessary, her hands moving with the practiced calm of someone who had delivered 1,000 royal children and buried a few of them too. Royal wolves shift late, she said, half to the court, half to herself, unless the bloodline is direct and the child is under extreme threat. Then the first shift can come early. A cub in early shift steadies through the father's bond. Recognition and closeness are what settle the fever. The father does not need to know why he feels it. He only needs to feel it. But if something is blocking that recognition, if the bond cannot reach him at all, the fever has nothing to steady against. It grows worse. Varric pressed forward again, then confirmed the bloodline and let the crown take responsibility for his welfare. I am not asking permission, Mara said without looking up. I am telling you what this child needs, and it is not a nursery full of strangers. It is his mother, and it is time. Kelda descended from the throne. He did not order anyone. He simply walked to where Mara knelt and looked down at the small, trembling wolf and at the woman who would not release him even to a king. Take them to the infirmary, Kale said. No one touches the boy again without the healer's word. Orlan obeyed instantly, more careful this time than he had ever been about anything in his life. As he helped guide them from the hall, Mara did not thank the king. She did not look at him at all. She only held her son, wolf-shaped and burning, and walked forward on legs that had somehow found their strength again. The infirmary was quieter than the throne room, though not by much. Varric had followed, uninvited, still speaking of verification and royal protocol as though the last hour had been a formality rather than a wound reopened in front of the whole court. Seraphine offered, again, the protected nursery, and again Mara refused to let anyone near the boy while the fever still owned him. It was Orlan who finally spoke the sentence that ended the argument. The king ordered removal, he said. He did not order separation from the mother. I touched the child once while he was sick, and it cost him everything he had left to fight the fever with. I will not make that mistake twice. No one argued with him again. Kale stood at the doorway of the infirmary, watching a woman he had never met before that morning refuse to let go of a child wearing his own bloodline on its skin. What is his name? Kale asked. Mara did not look up from Noah. Noah Vale, she said. He keeps his father's name until his father's name has been cleared. Kale said nothing to that. He did not ask her to change it. He simply nodded and stepped back and let the healer work. Later, in a smaller room away from the noise of the court, Mara finally spoke of the man she had lost. Her voice was steady in the way that only comes after a person has told a story so many times to disbelieving ears that grief has worn smooth edges into the words. His name was Kieran, she said. He told me he served the crown in ways he could not explain. He never claimed to be more than that, and I never asked him to be. He said that when his work was finished, he would tell me everything. He asked me to trust him until then. I did. Kale listened without interrupting, though something in his chest had gone tight and unfamiliar since the moment he heard the name Kieran. Mara reached into the collar of her dress and drew out a ring carved from pale wood worn smooth by years against her skin. We married by border oath, she said. There was no priest, no registry, only a blood token, a promise, and a witness who saw us swear it. Under the old frontier law, that is enough to make a marriage true. A blood token, a spoken oath, and one living witness. The registry only records it afterward. It does not create it. That is how it works where I come from. It should be enough here too. She had been carrying Noah for 6 months when Kieran left for the border the last time, 3 years ago now. She remembered the exact weight of that goodbye, because it had been the last one. She spoke the oath itself, the exact words, the way a person recites something they have said so many times in the dark that it no longer feels like speech. When the northern snow turns red, I will find the road home by your voice. The moment the words left her mouth, Cale's head split with a pain that had no source he could point to. Inside him, Riven clawed at something locked, something old, something that refused to open no matter how hard the wolf pushed against it. Mara did not know what she had just triggered. She only knew, in that instant, that she had a choice to make about a small burned scrap of fabric she had kept sewn into the lining of her cloak for 3 years. It was the last piece of Kieran's mission tag, the one thing that had survived whatever had taken him from her. She had told no one it existed. She had believed, without ever saying it aloud, that if the crown ever found it, they would take it from her the way they had taken everything else, and she would be left with nothing to prove he had ever lived at all. She did not yet know that the oath she had just spoken carried its own legal weight. To her, it had only ever been a private thing between 2 people in love. She had guarded the tag instead, believing it was the only proof that mattered. Far from that room, in a chamber built for quieter business than courts and thrones, Lord Varric felt an old warning rune stir beneath his skin, a monthly maintenance signal, tied to a seal he had commissioned 3 years ago, one meant to keep certain memories locked away from a king who could not be allowed to remember them. The oath phrase had reached further than Varric expected. He moved quickly to reinforce what he had built, and somewhere inside himself, Cale felt the world tilt, as though a door he had never known existed had just been shoved hard back into its frame. He gripped the edge of a table to keep from falling. No one in the room understood why except perhaps Riven, who howled once, low and furious, at a wall no blade could cut through. Mara watched the king stagger, and reached out on instinct before she caught herself, and pulled her hand back. She did not yet know what she had almost done. For a man the court had ordered, thrown out only hours earlier. She only knew that whatever this pain was, it had begun the moment she spoke words that belonged only to her, and a man everyone insisted was dead. That night, sitting beside Noah's small sleeping form, still faintly warm with the last of his fever, Mara made a decision she had resisted for 3 years. She drew the burned scrap of mission tag from the lining of her cloak. She turned it over in her fingers, feeling how thin it had become, how little of Kieran's world had survived to reach her. I kept it because it was the last proof he existed, she said quietly, to no one, to everyone. But if I keep it alone, they will make me disappear too. In the morning, she placed it in the hands of a young archives scribe named Talia, who had watched the entire spectacle in the throne room and said nothing, only listened, the way people who intend to actually help usually do. Talia did not ask Mara to trust the crown. She only asked for time and a name and whatever else Mara could remember. It did not take Talia long to find what she was looking for. Buried in the Border Service archives was a record for an operative named Kieran Vale, created under an authorized field alias 3 years earlier, tied to a shadow mission along the Northern Territories. Talia read the file twice before she let herself believe it. Kieran Vale was not another man wearing another name. It was the field identity issued to Cale Draven himself in the last months before his coronation, when he had still moved through dangerous territory as a commander rather than a king. Mission protocol sealed field aliases away from the public registry entirely, by design. A council regency had quietly managed the crown's daily affairs during his absence, under the story that their king was in seclusion, recovering from a wolf bond injury. Only a handful of counselors had ever known the truth of where he actually was. That was why no one at court had questioned his absence, and that was why no one now stood ready to say his 2 names had ever belonged to the same man. The record had been deleted, not lost. deleted deliberately by someone with the authority to erase a royal operative from the crown's own memory. Talia brought the finding to a border scout named Merrick, a weathered man who had spent most of his life watching quiet roads. For signs of trouble no one else wanted to look for, Merrick did not need convincing. "I stood witness the night they married," he said. "I heard the oath myself." Kieran Vale was no deserter. He was hunting something dangerous, and whatever found him first did not leave a body behind. "I carried this map for 3 years," Merrick said, "because I did not trust a single messenger who might have carried it instead. Lord Varric's reach ran through half the border posts I could have used. I waited for a witness the crown could not erase, or a token strong enough to make them listen. The boy's shift finally gave me both." He unrolled the half-burned map from an inner pocket, its edges scorched, its markings partial but legible, a route, weapons moving from noble estates into rogue pack territory, the kind of trade that could tear a fragile piece apart if it ever reached the wrong hands. KL, standing in the doorway of the archive, felt something shift inside him that had nothing to do with memory and everything to do with responsibility. He had authorized shadow missions like this one. He had allowed them to operate under a secrecy protocol with no outside oversight, no independent archive review, no one watching the watchers. He had built the very silence that had swallowed a man alive and left a widow kneeling in his court, begging to be believed. Mara found him there, staring at the map without truly seeing it. "There is a treatment rune layered into your bond," she said carefully. "I always believed it was for trauma, standard care after a battlefield injury." But the oath phrase reacted to it like a key turning in a lock that was never meant to be found. "I do not think it is trauma care, Your Grace. I think it is a seal," she warned him against forcing it open. A memory seal, broken carelessly, could shatter more than recollection. It needed to be opened the way it had been built, piece by piece, proof by proof, until there was nothing left to argue with. The same rune that had warned Varric days earlier, when the oath phrase first struck the seal, told him exactly where that challenge was unfolding now. He had followed its pull straight to the archive door. Varric arrived before Kale could respond, flanked by Seraphine, both of them already reaching for a new version of the story to hand the court. "This woman has clearly seen an opportunity," Varric said, "and she is using a sick child to manipulate a grieving king into believing a fiction." Seraphine folded her hands as though she were the reasonable one in the room. "The widow relief denial was correct under the information available at the time," she said. "A protected nursery remains the safest option for a child of uncertain status." Mara had heard enough lies, dressed as concern, to last 3 lifetimes. "Don't call my son an heir," she said, "while you still call his mother a liar." No one in the room had an answer for that. The formal hearing was set before the full crown of Blood Moon 2 days later. Mara walked in on her own feet this time, Noah in her arms, no longer wolf-shaped but still pale from fever, his small fist curled around the wooden ring at her throat. Kale did not sit on his throne. He stood a step below it, level with the floor. Mara walked on, refusing to judge her, from a height he no longer believed he had earned. Varric spoke first, as he always did, insisting the royal shift alone was sufficient to confirm succession, that the rest was a matter of paperwork the crown could settle without further delay. Mara's voice cut through his before he finished. "My son is not a shortcut for this throne to skip past the truth about his father." Talia stepped forward with the proof she had gathered, laying each piece before the court in careful order, refusing to let any single item carry more weight than it had earned. The wooden ring, authenticated as a valid border oath token. The mission tag, matched to a sealed field file under the name Kieran Vale. The oath phrase itself, cross-referenced against Merrick's sworn witness account. Merrick's testimony, placed on record before the full court, confirming a marriage the registry had tried to erase. A blood resonance test, nothing more invasive than Myra pressing Noah's small palm briefly against Kale's, with Mara's consent given first, confirming what the shift had already made clear, that Noah was the king's son by direct bloodline, and confirming nothing beyond that. Mair's medical report on the memory seal and the treatment rune that had concealed it for 3 years. And finally, the weapons ledger, tying noble estate shipments to a route that led directly into Rogue Pack territory, the very secret Kieran Vale had died trying to expose. Kale listened to every piece without interrupting, and when Talia finished, he spoke the only line he believed he had the right to speak. "No royal blood in that child gives me the right to claim the woman who kept him alive when my own court abandoned her." Mara looked at him, and for the first time since she had entered the throne room 3 days ago, something in her chest allowed itself to soften, just slightly, just enough to keep listening. She spoke the oath phrase once more, this time not as a private grief, but as sworn testimony before the crown. Noah, sensing something in the air, reached for the wooden ring against his mother's neck and pressed it, without knowing why, into his own small palm. The crown verified the oath as legitimate. The mission seal opened, and inside Kale, the wall Riven had clawed at for days finally gave way, not all at once, but in pieces, the way a door long swollen shut finally yields when enough hands push together. Memory returned to him in fragments, not proof, only feeling. Mara laughing at him for burning a pot of soup in a house with a crooked roof. His own hands mending that roof before the first snow. The wooden ring, new then, sliding onto her finger under an open sky. The small flutter of a child not yet born, felt once, briefly, against his palm. A map of a weapons route he had been so close to finishing. Varric's face above him in a haze of pain, promising treatment, promising safety. A whispered promise of his own, made to Mara before he left for the last time, that he would come back and tell her everything. The memories did not prove his innocence to the court. They only proved something quieter, and only to himself, that he had loved her, that he had meant to keep his word, that something else had stolen the chance to keep it. Talia opened the mission file, fully now that the seal no longer resisted her. Merrick's half-map matched the weapons ledger, almost line for line. The seal healer's original authorization bore Varric's signature, alongside a council order granting him oversight no one else had ever reviewed. Monthly reports confirmed the seal had been maintained, quietly, for 3 years, under the cover of ongoing trauma care. Kale knelt in front of Mara and Noah, not as a king granting mercy, but as a man finally allowed to see what he had lost. "Noah is my son," he said, "but Mara is not mine because I remembered. She is the woman I failed because I forgot, and because my own court found forgetting useful." Varric tried once more to frame the seal as protection for the crown, a necessary secrecy in a dangerous political landscape. The crown did not accept that argument. The weapons ledger alone tied him to a conspiracy that had nothing to do with protecting anyone but the noble houses profiting from it. He was arrested on the spot, charged with an illegal memory seal, the erasure of a royal mission record, the staging of a false death, and conspiracy in an arms trade that had crossed the border he was sworn to protect. Seraphine's part in the matter was smaller, but it was not nothing. Talia placed the original widow relief denial before the court, Seraphine's signature clear at the bottom of the page. "I followed the records available to me," Seraphine said. Kale's answer was quiet and final. Those records were built by someone with the power to erase a living man. The person who signs a denial still carries the weight of refusing to look further. When a woman stood in front of her, holding proof of a marriage and a fevered child in her arms, Seraphine was suspended from the Widow Relief Fund, and a formal inquiry was opened into the fund's pattern of denials against claimants without noble standing. She was not chained beside Varric. She was made to answer for cruelty dressed as paperwork, which was, in its own quieter way, its own kind of guilt. Kale stood before the full court, no longer speaking as a king defending his throne, but as a man finally naming what he had allowed to happen. "I forgot because they sealed my mind," he said, "but I failed because I let my court build a place where a wife could stand before me and still be called no one." He gave his orders without hesitation. The charge of desertion against Kieran Vale was struck from every record that had ever carried it. Mara and Noah were placed under formal crown protection, effective immediately. Any claim to royal custody of the child was suspended, pending the full resolution of the case. A new decree forbade separating a child from a primary caregiver during first shift fever, under any circumstance, by any authority, including the crown itself. The Shadow Mission archive was sealed from further unsupervised use and placed under independent review for the first time in its history. The weapons investigation was reopened, this time with full oversight, and every widow relief denial from the past 3 years was ordered re-examined, one file at a time, by hands that had not written the original refusals. Border oath marriages would now be logged for Crown Registry the moment any witness or token came forward, instead of waiting on a widow to fight her way into a throne room to be believed. And no memory treatment on any royal bond would ever again be authorized by a single counselor. It would require an independent healer's sign-off and a periodic review to confirm the person under seal still consented to the reason for it. It would have been easy, after all of that, for the court to simply crown Mara as Luna and call the story finished. Mara did not allow it. When the first noble tried the title on her, testing how it might sound in a room that had mocked her only days before, she stopped him before it could take root. "I did not kneel in this hall to be traded from a poor widow into a piece of royal property," she said. Kale did not argue with her, and he did not try to soften what she had said into something more convenient for the crown. "Mara Vale became my wife by a valid border oath, before this court erased her," he said. "What that marriage becomes now is hers to decide as much as it is mine." Mara set her conditions plainly, without asking permission to have them. Noah would be treated fully before any talk of succession ritual touched him again. Every wrongly denied widow relief case would be reopened and resolved. The weapons investigation would be carried through to its end, not quietly folded away once the noble names involved became inconvenient. The memory seal investigation would remain public record, not buried the way Varric had buried everything else. Noah would keep the name Vale until Mara herself chose otherwise, and she would retain the right to leave the court at any point if she ever felt herself becoming evidence again instead of a person. Kale agreed to all of it without negotiation. He told her she could remain in the capital under crown protection, or return to the border village she had come from, or ask for protection anywhere else she wished to build a life. He told her he would see Noah only under terms she and the healer agreed to. Nothing assumed, nothing owed to him, simply because memory had returned his name to a bloodline chart. He did not ask her forgiveness. He only told her the truth and let her decide what to do with it. Some nights later, in the quiet of the infirmary, Mara sat beside Noah's bed as his fever finally broke for good, his small chest rising and falling in an easy, ordinary rhythm no court could argue with. Kale stood outside the open door, close enough to see them both, far enough not to intrude. Riven, in spirit form only he could feel, lay down beside the sleeping wolf cub, not as a symbol of royal succession, but as a father watching over his son the way any father might, quietly, without demanding anything in return. Mara looked up and found Kale watching from the doorway. She held his gaze for a long moment, longer than she had allowed herself in 3 days, long enough to weigh everything that had happened between a throne room and this small quiet room. Then, slowly she nodded. Not a vow, not a crowning. Only an opening, small and uncertain, offered on her own terms, and no one else's. The royal wolf had proven who Noah's father was. Mara's nod was the only thing that decided whether that father was allowed to come inside.